The New Girl and the Stolen Library. The first day Maya noticed her, the new girl walked like she owned the hallway. A leather jacket too big for her shoulders, a smirk that never fully reached her eyes, and a duffel slung over one shoulder like it contained the universe. Everyone clustered into cliques: jocks, brainy kids, quiet kids who read books in corners. But Maya had always belonged to the small, stubborn band of gamers. Back then, it was more than a hobby. It was barter and blood and midnight adventure. Maya lived for pixelated horizons. She could coax a dead floppy back to life with the same patient hands she used to fix her mother's broken camera. Games were her currency, her escape, and often the only thing she and her neighbor Wren could afford to fight boredom with. They pooled odd jobs, saved, wrote checkbooks that always seemed to bounce, and every few months, airmail packages would arrive with the kind of foreign labels that felt like treasure maps. So when the new girl, Lila Carver, with her voice like static and her uncle's stories, breezed into their lives and announced she had shelves of games at home, Maya felt the old thrill. Finally, someone who understood. Lila's uncle's basement was a legend. Games in boxes, manuals in foreign languages, cracked plastic and impossible titles. Lila promised trade-offs, promised copies, promised favors in return for a little trust. Maya trusted too fast. She trusted like a kid with a map and no sense of danger. She and Wren handed over originals that had taken months of saving to buy. Boxed copies, manuals with dog-eared pages, the first editions from a mail-order store in Berlin. In exchange, they received floppies that wouldn't boot, discs missing the little signature stickers of copy protection, and a smug note. "Try this, Patch. Dunno why yours won't run, LOL." When they'd learned the hard way that LOL was a closing that tasted like contempt. It wasn't theft, exactly. Not by legal measures, anyway. It was worse by teenage standards. Betrayal. Maya felt her stomach drop each time she inserted a floppy and watched the drive whir and spit it back like a rejection slip. Lila's duffel grew heavier with treasures, while the two of them scavenged for what was left. When Wren's Doom 2, the one with the map they'd stayed up nights drawing, showed up scuffed and stamped, something inside Maya hardened. The AIDS lecture and the stray packets. The school auditorium smelled of cheap varnish and fluorescent bulbs. Mrs. Harrigan had a way of saying vulgarity with academic indignation. The guest speaker, a woman with an assured voice and a badge that glinted like sincerity, spoke about responsibility and education. Lila sat 2 rows ahead, fingers drumming a rhythm under her seat. Maya noticed the corner of Lila's lips curl each time the speaker used the word safe. At the end of the assembly, volunteers handed out pamphlets, glossy leaflets with hard facts, statistics with metallic authority, and in the corner, brightly colored condoms in small official packets stamped with the foundation's logo. The room was quiet, with the kind of embarrassed attention that belongs to rituals where adults try to teach children things they suspect will humiliate them later. Everyone avoided eye contact with the condoms. Maya and Wren, though, grabbed a handful. They laughed because they were teenagers, and because humor was a good camouflage. "Keep one for a joke," Wren suggested, sliding a little packet into her jacket pocket. The packet felt like contraband treasure. For days afterward, rumors swirled like dust. The funniness of being grown up about bodies. The awkwardness of the word homosexuality pushed into teenage mouths like a moldy candy no one wanted. Lila made a joke about playing with someone else's joystick, and the auditorium felt smaller. The idea with ink and paper. Maya had a printer. It was a miracle. An inkjet with a crooked cartridge and a tray that chewed paper like a playful dog. She'd printed cheat codes, scanned pages from manuals, reconstructed cover art for damaged boxes. Her mother rolled her eyes at the expenses but never asked to see what the ink was used for. To Maya, the printer was a tiny machine of miracles. One rainy Friday, Ren and Maya sat cross-legged on Maya's living room floor, surrounded by game boxes and pamphlets. They ran their fingers over damaged manuals and cursed into the wet light seeping under the curtains. Ren tossed a glossy pamphlet onto the coffee table and laughed in a voice that had sharp edges that night. "What if," Ren said, "we made her taste her own arrogance for once?" Maya's heart did something small and dangerous. "What do you mean?" They spoke in lists and whispers. They talked of embarrassment, of a punishment that would sting but not break, something that would force Lila's family to look. She didn't come from a household that cared for public gossip. Her mother taught at a church school, wrote letters home in ink that stopped arguments before they began. That, precisely, was the fulcrum. Some ideas are selfish and small. Some spread like wildfire into blackened, feral things. The prank they assembled would be a perfect fiction. A letter from the AIDS Foundation, phrased with precise clinical compassion, bound with brochures and a packet of condoms. The letter would be addressed to Mr. Carver, care of the household, ensuring the first pair of eyes to see it would likely be Lila's parents. The goal was humiliation, of Lila, not harm. And yet, even as they designed the faux stationery in their heads, Maya felt a tremor of doubt. "Think about it," Ren said. "She's been laughing at us for months. She's taken stuff. She needs to know how loneliness tastes." Maya pushed aside the doubt. The injustice felt larger than fear. Lila had taken their afternoons, their pride, and their trust. They would take something back. The plan, in teenage logic, was pure and righteous. Faith. They found the logo online. It was primitive by modern standards, but official enough when printed. Maya adjusted fonts until the spacing looked right. Ren brought tea-stained envelopes and an old typewriter they'd rescued from the school theater department. Between them, they wrote a letter that was both tender and damning. They mimicked the voice of outreach workers who treated curiosity with care. "Dear Lila," they wrote it first, then changed it to "Dear Miss Carver," when they decided formality would make the envelope look more legitimate. They mentioned attending our recent educational session, asked if further materials might help, and, the strangest, most cutting sentence, "Please find enclosed a selection of resources and a small sample for your consideration." They packaged the pamphlets they'd collected at the assembly. Glossy advice about condoms, helpline numbers, invitations to seminars, and slipped a condom packet inside. Ren added an extra layer, an anonymous stamp that looked like it had been paid in haste, an inner note printed on a small card that read, without melodrama, "We understand this can be a confusing time." On the night they drove to the mailbox, rain blurred the world into silver ribbons. Maya's hands shook as she dropped the envelope into the slot. They wrote the return address as if the foundation were a real place. For the sake of fairness, Wren said. If anyone asks, we're only trying to get their attention. They left feeling like conspirators and saints. The letter arrives. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Maya and Wren watched from across the street as Lila's younger brother, a scrawny boy with a mop of hair, opened the mailbox and handed the envelope to their father without a word. Lila had school late that day. She waved from inside the house as she folded herself into a book, looking like a person who had stepped into a role and never planned on leaving. It happened fast after that. The Carver household shifted from ordinary hums and the sound of plates to a sound like a kettle about to scream. The mother read, lips moving. The father read, brow folding. Maya expected scolding. She expected embarrassment. What she didn't expect was the kind of tearing grief that left the house vibrating. Neighbors later said they'd heard shrieks. Mrs. Carver wept with a strange wail that wasn't just sorrow. Mr. Carver slammed doors like someone punching a hole through the air. Lila's father forbade visitors. He forbade the internet, but the internet was still a promise, not a presence. He forbade nothing, really. He simply hammered. Everything in the Carver household turned inward. Lila's mother stopped answering the phone. She sat in the kitchen with sheets of pamphlets spread like a courtroom, a pile of flossed tea bags to one side. Someone from the school called. Lila refused to talk about it in class, eyes red-rimmed, and the smirk was gone from her face. Guilt is a shape. Maya and Wren had imagined satisfaction. Instead, they found an odd, sour aftertaste. The plan had worked in the sense of spectacle. It had forced the family to look, to question, to mobilize against perceived truth. But the backlash was not what they'd thought. Guilt arrived not as a thunderbolt, but as a slow, suffocating fog. They said nothing for a week. They traded looks that were too long and tasted like regret. The principal called them in, and they rehearsed answers that tasted like equal parts candor and denial. Lila accused them, not in public at first, but in the way a person accuses when they're not sure. A text message sent at 3:14 a.m. that said, simply, "You did this." Maya stared at the message and felt a coldness that was part shame, part adrenaline. Why had she done it? Why had they sent a letter that implied something an entire family might not want to confront? The question rolled in her head like a loose stone in a shoe. The confrontation. The day they were summoned to the principal's office, the sky outside was a washed pencil gray. Lila's parents sat across from them, like statues carved in disappointment. Mr. Carver's jaw clenched until it whitened. Mrs. Carver's hands had the flutter of someone who might drop a dish at any moment. Lila sat on the edge of the chair, her posture defensive and frightened. The principal told them, in a voice that tried to be neutral, that the Carvers had suffered distress and family upheaval. He had called the foundation. They had no record of sending the packet. A volunteer at the outreach center said they hadn't mailed anything to the Carvers, and the principal looked at Maya and Wren as if they had set a match to something that could have burned down. Lila accused them with the slow precision of someone cataloging all the ways she had been betrayed. "You took something that wasn't yours," she said. "You made my family think I was someone I am not." Wren's mouth opened. You laughed at us on the bus. You took our stuff. That doesn't justify making my parents believe their child might be in danger, Lila said. Her voice broke somewhere between triumph and devastation. They were terrified. Do you know how that feels? Maya could feel the room condensing. Her throat ached as if she were swallowing razor blades. For the first time, she saw Lila not as a thief with a duffel, but as a frightened person. The image of her smirking in class flashed across Maya's mind like an old photograph. When they confessed, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like stepping off a cliff with the knowledge that the ground might not catch them. Maya admitted to designing the letter, printing the logo, selecting the pamphlets. She explained their grievances, the games, the betrayals, the months of being laughed at. She did not, in that moment, know how to measure retribution against the pain of possible damage they'd caused. The principal didn't expel them. He gave them detention, community service, and a stern lecture about empathy. The Carvers demanded apologies. The community demanded explanations. Lila's mother wanted assurances that this would never happen again. Mr. Carver wanted to press charges, but the law was skeptical of teenage wrongdoing that had no financial theft attached. Consequences are not neat. The fallout was not a simple arc. Ren and Maya did their hours of service at the outreach center, folding pamphlets and listening to women who had their own complicated histories. Maya scrubbed folding tables and answered phones for a helpline with trained volunteers who steered callers through a calm, practiced voice. Each call was like a mirror. Men and women called to confess, to seek advice, to ask for help, to ask whether their feelings made them acceptable. Maya found herself becoming careful with words, understanding that language could sever or soothe. She visited the Carver house less often than she expected. Lila retreated into herself, her smirk replaced by an iron quiet. The game community fractured for a time into whispering cliques that debated ethics as if it were a tournament. Old favors were recalled. Some people hated them for what they'd done. Others, in hushed confession, confessed they had wanted something similar but didn't act. As for Lila, the revenge had clipped her wings in a way both terrible and instructive. She lost trust with her parents for a while, and that made her act more furtively in certain ways. She didn't run away from school, but there was a visible armor about her, a hard shell that suggested she'd been carved and was now healing. The moment of reckoning. Months later, in a hall lined with blue lockers and a row of posters advertising charity drives, Lila found Maya alone. It was the kind of encounter that might have been staged in a smaller, kinder world. Lila's expression was unreadable, like a book with the jacket removed. "You shouldn't have done it," she said softly. "It could have been worse. People could have hurt me. You should have known that." Maya felt her own chest tighten. "I know," she said. I thought you'd learn." "And did you?" Lila asked. For a long moment, Maya didn't have words. "No," Maya admitted. "Not then. I learned after. I learned on the days I had to answer the phone at the helpline." Lila looked at her then, not with anger but with a complicated curiosity. "Do you ever miss the games?" she asked. "Every day," Maya said. "But I miss the people who sat with me to play them more." They didn't make peace that day. They didn't swap songs or secrets. But there was the beginning of an uneasy understanding.
The weight of justice.
Like the first thaw of
The
winter
story
water
didn't
hitting the
end
pavement.
on a neat morality card. Justice was not a gavel slam or a tidy lesson. Maya kept playing games, but with the blunt knowledge of what cruelty could cost. She repaired manuals and scanned boxes, and tried to rebuild the small community that had frayed because of their actions. She volunteered more with the outreach center, not as a penitent, but as someone who wanted to be close enough to understand the consequences of language. Wren drifted away from some friendships and closer to others. They argued sometimes, the way old conspirators do, about whether their prank had been justified. The game community, for its part, became more cautious. People learned to label their trades and to take pictures before handing over originals. The currency of trust had been recalibrated. Months turned to a year. The chocolate-toned sunsets of that autumn were replaced with a brittle winter that made windows fog like breaths. Maya graduated from high school with a list of small triumphs and a knowledge of how easily a lie can bend a life. She kept the duffel of old games in a closet, a pile of relics that smelled faintly of smoke and dust. Sometimes, late at night, she'd pull out a disc and slot it into the drive and feel the small, old thrill. But there was always the palette of consequence. The memory of Mrs. Carver's tears, Mr. Carver's slammed door, and Lila's quiet accusation in the principal's office. Because every revenge, no matter how precisely planned, carries an invisible ledger of damage. The quiet after the storm. Years later, when they were older and the world had shifted in ways no teenager could have predicted, Maya would sometimes think about the way adolescents invent justifications like talismans. She understood why they'd done what they did. She also understood the cruelty of it. In her 30s, an email would arrive from a man named Carver, not Lila's father, but an uncle. A note forwarded by someone who had found the games in a box at a garage sale. He wrote a simple sentence. "We found this. Thought of you." Attached was a photo of a cracked game box and a folded Polaroid of a girl with a leather jacket and a small, defiant smile. Maya replied. She didn't ask for forgiveness, because that seemed large and theatrical then. She said, simply, "I hope you're all okay." The reply came back after a few days. "We are. Time helps." On the surface of things. What stays with Maya most, in the end, is not the shame or the taste of victory or the thrill of the prank. It is the realization that she had been both villain and victim in a play that didn't have actors who only knew their lines. She had wanted retribution for gentler wounds and had given pain in return. The balance sheet of teenage justice had always been messy. Sometimes she thinks of Lila, imagining her as a woman in a city where people are less certain, where a leather jacket is more age than rebellion. Sometimes Maya imagines knocking on her door with a replacement copy of Doom 2, still in its worn painted box, and placing it on the doorstep like a peace offering. Sometimes she imagines leaving the package without knocking, like penance. But penance of that kind would have been small, a note in the margin of a larger life. The last letter. Once, when Maya had nearly forgotten the shape of the past,
She found the original printed logo in the back of a drawer. The ink had faded, but the outline remained. For a strange, private moment, she held it to the light and thought about how a piece of paper could cleave an ordinary week into before and after. She wrote a letter then, not to any foundation, but to a girl who had once been new and dangerous and entirely human. She wrote about regret in careful sentences, about the way guilt had taught her a more careful kind of empathy. She wrote about the helpline, about people who had taught her to say less and listen more. She left the letter in the mailbox across the street from Lila's childhood house, the same one she'd used years ago. The world was smaller now, and there were fewer envelopes that felt like explosives. The mailbox smelled of metal and rain. Maya didn't wait to see who picked the letter up. She didn't need to. Some things, she had learned, cannot be taken back. Some lessons can only be carried forward, heavy and honest, like a console in a rucksack, powered on and imperfect, still offering a game you can play with someone who might one day forgive you. Epilogue. On mercy and memory. Revenge is a neat word with lean edges. It makes stories fit into frames and gives harm a reason. But real lives are less tidy. In the years following the prank, Maya discovered that revenge is a living thing. It changes the people who touch it. It taught her the weight of language, the way an envelope can change a family, a reputation, and a child's world. She learned to make amends the only way she could, by being present in small ways, by volunteering, by listening. She learned to repair, not just games and manuals, but the frayed, human threads that make small communities possible. It was not a heroic redemption. It was slow, granular work. Returning a borrowed item on time, apologizing without waiting to be asked, keeping silent when a joke could wound. In the end, the most thrilling part of it all was not the public spectacle of the prank, but the private confrontation with herself. That was the night she stopped pretending that retribution could ever be clean. She had wanted to teach a lesson, and instead, the world taught her how to ask for one. And sometimes that, she thought, was the bravest thing of all.